Millions knew Jack Nicholson as the wild, fearless face of Hollywood. Then, after decades of unforgettable performances, he simply stopped appearing on screen. His last film came in 2010, and for years, fans wondered what had happened to a man who once seemed impossible to ignore. But Jack never truly vanished. His rare appearances, private life, family, and changing relationship with Hollywood reveal a very different story than the rumors suggest. Before Jack Nicholson became one of Hollywood's most famous faces, his life already held a secret that sounded almost like a movie. He was born in Neptune City, New Jersey, in 1937. Growing up, Jack believed the woman he called his older sister, June, really was his sister. He also believed the people he called his parents were his parents. But the truth was very different. June was actually his mother. The people Jack believed were his parents were his maternal grandparents. The family had kept this secret from him while he was growing up, and Jack did not discover the truth until he was already an adult. In 1974, a Time reporter researching a story about Nicholson uncovered the family secret. For most people, a discovery like that could completely change how they saw their childhood. But Nicholson later said the revelation was dramatic, without being something he considered deeply traumatic. He even felt that learning the truth helped explain parts of his life that had once seemed confusing. Long before that secret came to light, however, young Jack was already showing signs of the personality that would later make him famous. At Manasquan High School, he was known for being funny and rebellious. He was even voted class clown. College was not his dream. Instead, he worked ordinary jobs, including time as a lifeguard, before eventually heading toward California. Hollywood was not waiting for him with open arms. Nicholson first worked around the MGM studios, doing basic jobs while trying to find a way into acting. He trained with acting teacher Jeff Corey and performed with the Players Ring Theater. His first film role came in 1958 with The Cry Baby Killer. For nearly a decade, the dream moved slowly. He appeared in small films and low-budget productions. There were no huge awards, no superstar status, no guarantee that his name would ever become famous. Then, in 1969, everything changed. Easy Rider gave Nicholson the breakthrough he had been waiting for. His performance earned an Academy Award nomination and suddenly placed him in a completely different part of Hollywood. But the strange thing about Nicholson's story is that his biggest transformation had only just begun, because the boy who grew up inside a family secret was about to become the actor millions of people believed they knew, and they had no idea how much more was coming. The breakthrough did not make Jack Nicholson a star overnight. It opened a door. After years of small roles in low-budget films, Easy Rider gave Nicholson something he had been chasing for years: attention. His performance as George Hanson earned him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Suddenly, Hollywood was looking at him differently. But Nicholson did not fit the usual image of a perfect movie star. He had an unusual face, a sharp smile, a restless energy, and a way of speaking that could make even a simple sentence feel dangerous. That became his greatest strength. Instead of trying to look like every other leading man, Nicholson built a character of his own. Then came the roles that changed everything. In 1970, he appeared in 5 easy pieces. His performance showed that he could play a man who looked confident on the outside, but was deeply unhappy underneath. The role earned him another Oscar nomination. Then came The Last Detail. Then Chinatown. And with every film, Nicholson became harder to ignore. But the biggest moment was still ahead. In 1975, he starred in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The film became a major success, and Nicholson won the Academy Award for Best Actor. For the first time, the struggling actor from New Jersey had reached the top, but success came with a price. Nicholson was no longer simply an actor looking for work. He had become Jack Nicholson, a name that carried enormous expectations. The public wanted more of the wild personality they saw on screen. Hollywood wanted more hit movies, and Nicholson had to decide what kind of star he wanted to become. He answered by taking risks. He played darker characters, strange characters, funny characters, dangerous characters. Then in 1980, he took on one of his most famous roles ever, Jack Torrance in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. The film became one of the defining horror movies of its era, and Nicholson's performance turned his face into one of the most recognizable images in cinema. But something else was happening. Nicholson was becoming bigger than his movies. His personality became part of his fame. His famous grin, his interviews, his friendships, his relationships, and his courtside appearances all became part of the Jack Nicholson story. And Hollywood loved it. But the more famous he became, the harder it became to separate the actor from the legend. He continued collecting major roles and awards, including an Oscar for Terms of Endearment and another for As Good as It Gets. He also became unforgettable as the Joker in Batman. By the 1990s and 2000s, Nicholson had already done something very few actors ever achieve. He had become an icon. And what would you have done in his position? After reaching the very top, would you keep chasing the next role, or would you finally step away? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because Nicholson's greatest mystery was not how he became famous. It was why a man who had spent his entire life fighting for a place in Hollywood would eventually decide he did not need Hollywood anymore. And that decision was much more complicated than the world first believed. By the time Jack Nicholson reached the top, Hollywood was no longer simply a place where he worked. It had become a world where people watched him. His career had lasted for decades, and by the 1990s, he had already built something almost impossible to match. He had won 3 Academy Awards and earned 12 acting nominations, becoming one of the most honored male actors in Oscar history. But fame changes the meaning of ordinary life. For Nicholson, the public did not only want his movies, they wanted Jack Nicholson himself. His famous smile became part of his identity. His personality became part of his legend. Even when he was not acting, cameras followed him. One of the places where fans could regularly see him was a Los Angeles Lakers game. Nicholson became famous for sitting courtside, reacting to the action, talking with people around him, and sometimes becoming almost as entertaining as the game itself. It was a rare place where he could simply be Jack. But behind that public image was a man who had spent most of his adult life working at an extraordinary pace. Movie after movie, character after character, awards, interviews, premieres, expectations, and eventually something began to change. Nicholson was getting older, while Hollywood itself was changing around him. The roles that once seemed endless were becoming harder to find. At the same time, he had already achieved what most actors could only dream about. He had nothing left to prove. Then came The Bucket List in 2007, followed by How Do You Know in 2010. The latter became his final film role. After that, the screen went quiet. There was no dramatic farewell, no giant retirement speech, no final movie designed as a goodbye, just silence, and that silence created a mystery. Fans began asking the same question: why would one of Hollywood's greatest actors simply stop? Some reports suggested different reasons, but Nicholson himself pushed back against the idea that he had officially retired because of one simple problem. In a 2013 interview, he said he was simply less driven to be out there. That detail matters, because it suggests that Nicholson's disappearance may not have been about losing everything. It may have been about finally choosing what mattered more. If you have ever reached a point where you no longer wanted to prove yourself to everyone else, you may understand that feeling. And there was another important clue. Nicholson did not completely disappear. He still appeared at special events. He still supported people close to him. He still showed up when something truly mattered. But Hollywood was no longer his daily world. And this was only the beginning of the mystery. Because years later, when fans finally saw Jack Nicholson again, the reaction revealed just how much people had missed him. For years, the biggest question was simple. Where was Jack Nicholson? He had once been everywhere. Movie premieres, award shows, basketball games, Hollywood parties. Then suddenly, the man who seemed impossible to miss became almost invisible. But disappearing from Hollywood did not mean disappearing completely. Nicholson continued to live a much quieter life, making only occasional public appearances. And those rare moments became events because people had become so used to not seeing him. Then came February 2025. At the 50th anniversary celebration of Saturday Night Live, Nicholson made a surprise appearance. He was shown during the special and introduced Adam Sandler's performance, giving viewers a rare glimpse of the legendary actor. The reaction was immediate. People were not simply watching an actor appear on television. They were seeing a piece of Hollywood history return for a moment, and that moment helped correct something important. Nicholson had not completely disappeared. He had simply chosen a much smaller public life. There have also been reports of him appearing with family members, showing that his world outside Hollywood continued to matter to him. A 2025 report described a rare family appearance, another reminder that his life had moved far beyond movie sets. Still, the questions never completely stopped. Why did he not make another movie? Why did he stop chasing major roles? And was there a deeper reason behind his decision? Over the years, rumors about his health and memory appeared in the media, but those reports should not be treated as confirmed explanations for his retirement. Nicholson himself had previously explained that he simply was not as driven to work as he once had been, while people close to him have also pushed back against the idea of a simple, dramatic retirement. That distinction matters. There's a difference between a celebrity being forced away from an industry and a person deciding that the industry no longer controls his life. Nicholson's story appears much closer to the second. If you have ever felt tired of constantly proving yourself, remember this part of his story. Sometimes success is not about doing more. Sometimes it is about knowing when you have already done enough. And Nicholson had certainly done enough. 3 Academy Awards, 12 acting nominations, more than 5 decades of work, characters that became part of movie history. He had already secured the thing most actors spend their entire lives chasing, a lasting legacy. So when the cameras became less important, perhaps he did not see it as losing Hollywood. Perhaps he simply stopped needing it. But there was still one final question. What does a legend do after the world stops demanding another performance? The answer to that question may be the most revealing part of Jack Nicholson's story. The strangest part of Jack Nicholson's story is that there was never a single dramatic goodbye. He simply stopped. His final film, How Do You Know?, was released in 2010. Since then, Nicholson has remained largely outside the Hollywood machine. And that silence tells us something. Nicholson had already spent more than 5 decades giving audiences his time, his energy, and some of the most unforgettable performances in movie history. He had played rebels, criminals, romantics, comedians, villains, broken men, powerful men, and characters that seemed to carry pieces of Nicholson himself. But eventually, the question changed from, what role will Jack play next, to, does Jack even want another role? In 2013, Nicholson pushed back against reports that he had stopped working because he could no longer memorize scripts. He explained that the bigger issue was much simpler. He was no longer driven to work the way he once had been. That statement is important because it changes the entire story. There is no need to invent a dramatic reason when the man himself gave another explanation. He had reached a point where working was no longer something he needed to do. And perhaps that is the part audiences found hardest to understand. For most people, retirement means giving up something because they have to. For Nicholson, it looked more like a choice. James L. Brooks, one of the directors who worked closely with him, even said in 2023 that he did not believe Nicholson was truly retired, or open to one possibility. Maybe Nicholson never wanted to make a grand statement about leaving Hollywood. Maybe he simply wanted to live. Away from scripts, away from deadlines, away from cameras asking what he would do next. And if you have ever reached a moment when you realize you did not need to prove yourself anymore, you may understand why that choice can be powerful. Fame can give someone almost everything, but it can also take away privacy. Nicholson had spent decades being recognized everywhere he went. So perhaps the quiet life offered something Hollywood never could: control, privacy, time. In 2024, Laura Flynn Boyle, who remained friends with Nicholson, said he had never retired, reflecting the idea that his relationship with Hollywood was more complicated than a formal retirement announcement. And then, in 2025, Nicholson appeared at the 50th anniversary celebration of Saturday Night Live. For millions watching, it felt almost unreal. The familiar face was back, not for a new movie, not for an awards campaign, just for a moment. And that may have been the perfect ending to this chapter of his life. Because Jack Nicholson did not need another blockbuster to remind the world who he was. The world already remembered. what happened next was even more meaningful. Instead of asking what Jack Nicholson could still achieve, people began asking what his legacy would look like when the spotlight finally moved away. In the end, Jack Nicholson's disappearance from Hollywood may not be a mystery at all. It may be a choice. For more than 5 decades, Nicholson gave audiences unforgettable characters. He won 3 Academy Awards and became one of the most respected actors of his generation. His final film role was in How Do You Know in 2010. Since then, he has mostly stayed away from the spotlight, but his story did not end when the cameras stopped. In 2025, Nicholson surprised millions by appearing at the 50th anniversary celebration of Saturday Night Live. At 87, he introduced Adam Sandler's performance, creating one of the night's most memorable moments. It was a reminder that Nicholson had not been erased from Hollywood. He had simply chosen to live differently. And there is an important detail many people miss. His longtime friend and director James L. Brooks said in 2025 that Nicholson had not officially retired and still read scripts. Brooks even suggested that the door to another performance may not be completely closed. So perhaps the Ray All story is not about a man who lost Hollywood. It is about a man who reached the highest level of Hollywood and then decided he did not need to keep chasing it. That is a very different kind of ending. Nicholson once spent years trying to get noticed. He took small roles. He faced rejection. He waited for his breakthrough. Then he became the actor everyone wanted to see. But eventually, the chase stopped. The awards were already on the shelf. The famous roles were already part of film history. The audiences already knew his name. And when that happens, a person has a choice. Keep running after the next achievement, or step back and enjoy the life that exists away from the spotlight. Nicholson appears to have chosen the second path. His legacy now lives in the films he made, the characters he created, and the influence he left behind. From Easy Rider to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Chinatown, The Shining, Batman, and A Few Good Men, his work remains part of Hollywood history. And maybe that is why his disappearance feels so powerful. Jack Nicholson did not need a dramatic final scene. He did not need one last perfect movie. He did not need Hollywood to tell him when his story was over. He had already written it himself. Everyone faces moments when life changes, and the things that once mattered most no longer feel the same. Sometimes stepping away is not failure. Sometimes it is simply another form of freedom. And Nicholson's story reminds us of something Hollywood rarely teaches. You can spend your whole life becoming famous, and still decide that your most valuable years are the ones nobody is watching. So when people ask where Jack Nicholson went, perhaps the simplest answer is this: he did not disappear. He just stopped living for the audience. And after giving Hollywood more than 50 years, maybe he finally chose to live for himself. But this is not the only Hollywood legend whose story changed after fame. In another documentary, we uncovered a remarkable story of an icon who walked away from the spotlight for a completely different reason, and the truth behind that decision may surprise you. Until then, Jack Nicholson's final chapter remains exactly like the man himself: unpredictable, private, and unforgettable.